ever been quietly faithful to God, doing something that nobody sees, and then wondered, did that really matter and make a difference? If you have, this is for you. Oops, on the floor. You see, you're just seeing one domino, but God sees and puts in place the whole chain. And the reason this matters is because this is exactly how God works. There's a reason the Bible includes the genealogy of Jesus, and it's not the reason that most of us think. Because let's be honest, most of us skip right over it, don't we? All those unpronounceable names, and we think, yes, and so begat so-and-so. Can we get to the good bit? But it's there for a reason. What if that whole list, that genealogy, is God pulling back the curtain, showing us every domino he's positioned over 2,000 years? The book of Matthew opens with 42 generations from Abraham all the way through to Jesus. That's 2,000 years of ordinary people making seemingly ordinary choices. Rahab hiding the spies in Jericho. Ruth following Naomi to Bethlehem. Boaz obeying God and being faithful in small unseen ways. Their stories would eventually lead to King David, and eventually to Jesus himself. One life and then another, each of them just doing the faithful thing in front of them. Meanwhile, God was quietly putting together something none of them would see. And I think that long list of names we often skip over is God telling us every single one of these mattered. Every ordinary life, every quiet act of faithfulness, none of it was wasted. None of it. Because even when they couldn't see it, he was connecting it all together. And God's still doing this right now in our lifetime. Have you ever heard of a chap called Albert McMakin? Nope, neither had I till recently. But Albert was a 24-year-old farmer who lived in Charlotte, North Carolina. He'd recently become a Christian, and like a lot of new Christians, he wanted everyone to experience what he'd found. And there was this teenage boy, a friend of his, who worked on a nearby farm. He was 15 and a bit more interested in baseball and girls than he was in church. But Albert kept inviting him to come to the revival meetings that were happening in town. But this guy, he kept saying no. But Albert, he didn't give up. And eventually he said, "Why don't you come and hear our fighting preacher?" And the boy's ears pricked up. A fighting preacher? Now that sounded a bit more interesting. And then Albert sweetened the deal by letting the teenager drive his vegetable truck into town for the meeting. So this reluctant boy drove Albert's truck to a tent meeting in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he heard the gospel for the first time. He didn't respond that first night. He went back the next night, and the next. And a few weeks later, just before his 16th birthday, that teenage boy walked forward and gave his life to Jesus. His name was Billy Graham, and the rest, as they say, is history. But Albert had no way of knowing what would come from that invitation. He was just being faithful, doing what was in front of him, reaching out to a young lad who needed to hear about Jesus. He placed his domino. That's all he could see. But God, he saw the whole chain. But Albert wasn't the only one involved in this story. There was a young man named Vernon, part of a Christian businessmen's group in Charlotte, who'd been praying specifically for revival in the city. Vernon Patterson never stood in front of crowds, never preached a sermon, but he prayed. And those prayers were part of what had brought the evangelist to Charlotte in the first place, which is how Albert ended up at those meetings, which is how Albert ended up inviting a teenage farm boy to drive his truck. Both those men were being faithful with what was right in front of them. A prayer, an invitation, a vegetable truck. But God was weaving it all together. I don't know about you, but I find this comforting because most of the time I have no idea what God is doing. I show up, I do the thing that feels like the right thing, and then very often crickets. And there's been times and seasons when I've wondered, what is the point of this? Why am I doing it? And does any of it actually matter? And I think that's the hardest part of faithfulness. It's not the doing, it's the not knowing. It's the trusting that somehow, somewhere, my small actions are part of something bigger. But I'm just one domino, and so are you. We can't see what's coming, but we're not supposed to. That's not our job. Our job is to be faithful with whatever's in front of us, because God sees the whole chain. Albert McMakin never preached to stadiums. Vernon Patterson never wrote a best-selling book. Most people will never have heard of them, and they probably never will. But heaven is filled with people who are there because of their small, quiet faithfulness. One day we'll get to see how it all fits together. Every ordinary, invisible act of faithfulness. Every domino carefully positioned by God. I found this encouraging. It encourages me to keep going, to keep being faithful in the small things. And I hope it might for you, because we can't see where it leads, but He can. And He hasn't finished with your story yet.